In this article called Why Islam? Facts about Islam, promoted by modern-day Muslim apologists, after going through the usual apologetics of how Islam promotes modesty and chastity ostensibly, within the conclusion section it says Islam protects the society as well as the individual from acts of sexual deviation. The full link is below. This video will look at some of the core and important sources of Islam to see if this is really the case, or the usual mendacious claims made by apologists. Before the Islamic evidence is looked at, a question needs to be raised. If Islam actually promotes modesty and chastity, then why are most of those involved in sexual grooming gangs and assaults predominantly from the Muslim community, who often target white non-Muslim girls in Europe and elsewhere, as well as vulnerable girls from their own background? In other words, if what the apologists say is true, this should not be happening. In 2017, a report published titled Group-Based Child Sexual Exploitation Dissecting Grooming Gangs. On page 7, it says there is a disproportionate representation of Asian males of a Pakistani Muslim background committing these offences against mostly white girls. They dehumanize these girls because of their ethnicity and background. It says the report suggests the background of these men influenced their actions. On page 11, it says that 84% of them were convicted for grooming gang offences. This is a remarkable figure given that at the time Muslims only comprised 5% of the UK's population. The bitter truth is there does exist within the faith some precedents. It is not to say that the perpetrators are devout Muslims. Rather, there exists a correlation of exploiting the other and sexual deviancy that is already part of the culture and the religion that leads certain individuals towards certain actions over other communities. To deny this is to be in denial of reality. For example, in this article it explains how some Muslims do acknowledge this as a problem, such as senior lawyer called Nazir Afzal, who said the Muslim community must admit and address this problem. The Professional Muslims Institute heard when Muslim Asian girls were victims of child sexual exploitation, they were too scared to report it, some because of dishonouring their families. Another group called the Muslim Women's Network UK says due to notions that women are less than men that exists in Islam, this also contributed towards these issues. Indeed, there are elements of the religion that provides a protection for the perpetrators due to the so-called shame stigmatization and the need to uphold so-called honour of the family/community that is common amongst the Muslim community. In short, Islam is implicated in some of these problems somewhere. So, to deal with the root causes of these problems, firstly, one has to accept there does exist within Islam the notion that non-Muslims are lesser in humanity than Muslims. There exists within the Quran and Hadith literature some damning teachings as explained previously and will be elaborated upon in this video. All of this places Islam squarely as a problem from which it cannot completely exonerate itself from. Despite what the apologists say, it will become clear Islam is not part of the solution. For example, although Muslims, especially in the West, are quick to complain that they are discriminated against, they themselves view non-Muslims as less than them, so conversion becomes their endeavour. After all, it is part of the Quranic teachings that Muslims are better and the best of people, destined for heaven, whereas non-Muslims are the worst, destined to hellfire. The Quran dehumanizes non-Muslims by calling them the worst of creatures who will dwell in the fire for eternity. The Quran likens non-Muslims to animals, rather worse than animals. So when attacks happen by mostly Muslims against mostly non-Muslim girls, it is because Islam demonizes and belittles their human status. Unfortunately, there is Islamic antecedents for some of these sexual deviant behaviors, and unfortunately Muhammad, who is seen as the ultimate role model, engaged in some of these behaviors and encouraged it for others. For example, an early Quran commentator called at-Tabari for Quran 949 mentions an account that happened in the year 630 when Muhammad urged his followers to fight the Byzantine Romans. Some Muslims refused to fight. They had become weary with all the battles he was engaging them in. Moreover, the Romans had not attacked the Muslims, and what's more, Tabuk was an area controlled by the Ghassanid Christians, an ally of the Roman Empire. Suppose even if the Romans had attacked, being the most powerful army in the world, they could have easily destroyed the Muslims. However, in Muhammad's ongoing thirst for war, he entices his followers by spreading false rumours of an attack. It's really as a pretense for his own invasion and pugnacity, which some Muslims saw through and refused to fight. But it is what Muhammad says to them next in order to encourage them that is deplorable. Not only is it bad that he tries to bribe them with gifts, but also knowing some Arab men's weakness for white women, Muhammad promises them of the capturing of blonde women. The relevant part highlighted in red is Muhammad saying, quote, "Invade Tabuk and take as spoils the daughters of blonde and the women of the Romans." Briefly mentioned in the previous video, and here it is again. The hadith whereby when Muhammad could not hold his sexual desires after seeing a beautiful woman, he describes women as the devil, and in order to satisfy himself, he immediately has intercourse with his wife. Another variation of the hadith is found in Tirmidhi, where he describes the women as the devil. In Arabic, this is shaitan. So here is Islam's answer for abstinence. Instead of men suppressing their own sexual urges and weaknesses, Muhammad blames the women, hence the reason why she has to completely cover up and beaten if she does not. She is blamed and acting like a devil, so it is her fault if she is abused or raped, according to senior Muslim scholars. This will be shown next. Notice in the hadith Muhammad never described the man as a devil for having lascivious thoughts, or for abusing her, or if she is raped, or for not being able to control his lusts. Just the woman is blamed. Here are some direct consequences from the aforementioned teachings. For example, on 11th of July 2004, in the Telegraph, a senior Muslim cleric by the name of Sheikh Al-Qardawi is quoted as saying the female rape victims should be punished if dressed immodestly, going on to say when she is assaulted, she is guilty of provoking the sexual attack because her dress or behaviour aroused the man. He is not isolated in this regard. In an article titled "Iranian Cleric Blames Quakes on Promiscuous Women," it says Hujjatul Islam Kazim Siddiqui, the acting Friday prayer leader in Tehran, said women should stick to strict codes of modesty to protect themselves, saying many women who do not dress modestly lead young men astray and spread adultery in society, which increases earthquakes. The consequences of these teachings are already impacting on the abuse and grooming cases, with perpetrators using similar lines of argument to justify their behaviour. As abhorrent as all this is so far, it gets worse. Rape is used as a tactic of Islamic warfare and continues today. In this article it says ISIS, who claim they are practicing Muslims by the way, condones raping underage girls. Indeed, exploitation of underage girls is just another dangerous symptom of Muhammad's behaviour, as he himself practiced pedophilia. He had married Aisha when she was 6 and had intercourse with her at the age of 9, an age in which she used to play with dolls. Muhammad was in his 50s at the time. Ibn Hajar, commentator of Sahih al-Bukhari, states the reason why she was allowed to play with dolls even at the age of 9 was because she had not reached puberty. But Muhammad married and consummated, in other words, had sex with an underage girl. Ibn Hajar is a major Muslim scholar who believed she attained puberty at the age of 15, along with many other Muslim scholars. This is contrary to some of the apologetics because puberty was not the reason he waited 3 years to have sex with her. The real reason is covered in the book Islam, the Honest Truth. It is really disturbing and nothing to do with him waiting till her menstruation. However, as the saying goes amongst Muslim apologists, she was menstruating and therefore biologically has hit puberty, so it was fine for Muhammad to have sex with her. The flaw in this line of reasoning is a 9-year-old is not mentally or physically capable to understand sexual intimacy, hence it is still abuse. Furthermore, the apologists will say her parents gave permission, so somehow this makes it okay, or no one in her society or outside of her society objected. In fact, this argument would often be used amongst apologetics does not help the situation either, because it becomes wrong twice over, as the parents will be complicit of the abuse by consenting to the union. A societal norm, no matter how reprehensible, is still objectionable regardless of how many people accept it at the time. There were entire societies that accepted slavery as the norm, and other societies accepted cannibalism as the norm. But it still doesn't make either of these acts acceptable just because it was once accepted by the masses. According to Muslims, Muhammad's behaviour should be an example or the best of example for all people, and his actions should last the test of all times. A genuine question, knowing what Muslims know about Muhammad's behaviour, would they honestly have allowed him anywhere near their own wives and daughters? Would they have married their own young daughter to him at the age of 9 to be consummated with? If not, why not? The answers to these questions is axiomatic to any rational person. Deep inside, most Muslims know it is wrong, yet will still defend him because it is Muhammad. They should stop defending the indefensible, because if it was any other person other than Muhammad, Muslims would have been the first ones to cry foul of the abuse. This is the very definition of double standards. The standards should remain the same regardless of who commits these atrocious acts, whether it is Muhammad or someone else. To defend such actions, one is guilty of complicity with this type of behaviour and a sympathiser of child/female abuse. Therefore, Muslims cannot escape the charge of the abuse if they condone it. even if it is Muhammad. This abhorrent image of an old man marrying a young girl would not have been too different from Muhammad's own marriage to Aisha. It cannot be said with any integrity or honesty that this marriage is in contravention to the teachings of Islam. In fact, it is precisely because of Muhammad's actions these practices have existed and still exists amongst Muslims today. The Quran itself offers evidence for marrying and being sexually active with a prepubescent girl. Quran 65 verses 4 to 5 talks about the waiting period after divorce called iddah. Classical commentators such as Ibn Kathir say, quote, "The same for the young who have not reached the years of menstruation." End quote. A young girl who has not menstruated is a prepubescent girl, but the Quran talks about being able to divorce her after the waiting period. This interpretation is agreed by other classical Quran commentators such as Jalalain, Ibn Abbas, Al-Wahidi, and many others. As Muhammad married Aisha at 6 and had intercourse with her while she was 9, other than Muslim apologists who claim he did not do anything to her in those intervening 3 years of 6 to 9, he was married to her, and that would allow him certain so-called rights over her as a wife. Here is where the term mufakhaza comes into the Islamic lexicography. It is when someone engages in intercrural sex, also known as coitus interfemoris, among other names, but commonly referred to as thighing. According to Islam, it is allowed to do when vaginal intercourse is not possible either due to her age or menstruation. Here is an example of a fatwa or religious edict talking about the practice. Fatwa number 31409, issued on August 2000. A religious edict which was announced by the Permanent Committee for Islamic Research and Verdicts, an Islamic organization in Saudi Arabia established by the king that issues rulings in Islamic jurisprudence. In this edict, senior scholars, including the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, mention the following about Muhammad's interaction with Aisha in those intervening years. It's been translated, but it is too repugnant to read out. A slight pause will be taken to allow viewers to read it. In Tahrir al-Wasila, Volume 2, page 241, Ayatollah Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran, wrote of this practice with prepubescent children, saying in Ruling 12, it is not permissible to have intercourse before she is 9 years old, be it nikah, permanent marriage, or temporary marriage, muta. And as for all other pleasures such as lustful touch, embracing, and thighing, there is no problem in it, even if it is with a suckling infant. In this next clip is a short video of a brave Arab woman calling out this depravity on a well-known Islamic channel.
أقرت المتعة اللي بهذه التصنيفة اللي أنا بقولها لك. التمتع بالمفاخذة، عندهم التمتع بالملامسة، زين، التمتع بالمكاعبة، التمتع بالصغيرة. التمتع بالصغيرة تعرف شنو معناتها؟ معناتها يتمتعون بالطفلة اللي عمرها 2 3 سنين 4 سنين.
عشان ما ندخل في
التمتع
التفصيلات.
بالمفاخذة خل اشرح لك شنو هو. هذه ضد حقوق الطفل، هذه يعتبر اعتداء جنسي على الطفلة. يعني التمتع بالمفاخذة شنو ذي؟ التمتع بالرضيعة معناته ذي. زين، الرضيعة يعني كم عمرها؟ سنة ونص، أشهر. يعني هل يعقل رجل بالغ يمارس الجنس مع طفلة رضيعة وتقولون لي الشريعة الإسلامية أحلت هذه الأمور؟ خل المتعة
Just as Muhammad married and fondled, in other words, sexually abused young girls, in September 2017, Egyptian cleric Mufta Muhammad Maruf, also referred to as Abu said on TV that it is permissible to marry off newborn girls. He quotes the aforementioned Quran 65 verses 45 and other classical scholars as his evidence for this ruling. The link to the article is below, which also contains the clip, albeit it is in Arabic. Muhammad had a fascination for young girls. He tells his companions to marry young girls and fondle them. In this hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari 5080, Muhammad advises his companion Jabir, who had married an older woman, why he didn't like young virgins so he can fondle them, going on to say he can play with her and she can with him. In Muslim Ahmad 25636, Muhammad saw a baby girl crawling before him and said, quote, "If she grows up and I am still alive, I will marry her." End quote. The incident is also mentioned in Ibn Ishaq amongst other numerous Islamic sources. He died before he had the chance to marry her. Due to their incredulity, Muslims and their apologists will say these hadiths and sources are weak or incorrect. If that is the case, why have they remained within Islamic books? And furthermore, they are contained in some of Islam's oldest and most trusted traditional sources, and put in there by Muslim scholars of the highest repute, those who are more knowledgeable and respected than any Muslim alive today or since. When it comes to Islam, their words carries more weight than modern apologists every time. Instead of condemning rape, in Sahih al-Bukhari 2542, Muhammad allowed his companions to rape. His only advice was it's better not to practice coitus interruptus, meaning if they got pregnant, then it is Allah's decree. In Sahih Muslim 1456, he encourages his companions that they can rape women who have husbands still alive. Allah supports Muhammad by revealing Quran 424 to give express permission. It says in this commentary for Quran 424, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri said they had captured female prisoners of war, and because they were already married, they disliked having any physical relationship with them. So even the companions had a higher standard of morals and empathy than Allah and Muhammad. After their objections was raised, a Quranic verse from Allah was revealed to them to say that the women are now considered their captives, so it is lawful to have physical relationships with them, meaning they can rape them. There are no other words than rape, because no woman who has been captured by the enemy, have had family and friends killed, their homes and land demolished, and also still have husbands fighting against them, will voluntarily have sexual intercourse with the enemy. In Abu Dawud 2995, under the title "The Special Portion of the Prophet that was taken from the spoils of war," it mentions a girl called Safiya, daughter of Huway. Her father had been killed by the Muslims, and just before her capture, her husband was tortured and beheaded by Muhammad and the Muslims. Her entire people were killed by Muhammad and the Muslims. As she was the most beautiful girl, Muhammad took her for himself. In the hadith it says he cohabited and married her. No one other than Muslims will see a problem with this. But for the rest of the mankind, is it really believable she would willingly have sex with Muhammad after what he did to her family and people? The definition of non-consensual sex is rape, which means Muhammad raped her. In Ibn Sa'd's biography of Muhammad, his own companions feared for his life. One of them stood guard around his tent as he was having sex with Safiya. When Muhammad found out, he goes on to praise his guard for protecting him. As Muhammad said, the wife is to sexually satisfy the husband whenever he demands this. Otherwise, the angels curse her, as found in Abu Dawud 2141 and other similar hadiths. From this, senior Muslim clerics, some of whom run the largest network of Sharia courts in the UK, have claimed there is no such thing as rape within marriage. One such example is Sheikh Abu Sa'id, pictured here in The Independent. President of the Islamic Sharia Council in Britain, is quoted in numerous media outlets as having said the following in 2010: "The men who rape their wives should not be prosecuted because sex is part of marriage." He is not isolated. Another Muslim scholar called Perak Mufti Zakaria said, "Men can always have sexual intercourse with their spouses, even if the latter does not agree." He goes on to say that a Muslim woman has no right to reject her husband's demand. He then quotes a hadith of Muhammad. One such example is here, where Muhammad said a woman has to give herself even if she is riding on a saddle. Muhammad wanted women to be subservient to their husbands, and how he said he wished he could make them prostrate to their husbands, and how she cannot be dutiful to Allah unless she is dutiful to her husband. More examples from Islamic sources demonstrating the misogyny in Islam, including describing women as toys and the plaything of a man, are covered in the book Islam, The Honest Truth. Contrary to the apologetics, sexual abuse and molestation of women is not categorically condemned in Islam. Quran 53:32 teaches that a man touching, kissing, winking at a woman is not a major sin. The Arabic word lamam, translated in English as minor sin, circled in red, is the key word. Ibn Kathir and others explain it means as long as intercourse is not committed, then it falls in the lamam category, a minor sin according to major Quran commentators. Ibn Kathir says the word lamam means small faults and minor errors. Ahmad ibn Hanbal recorded that Ibn Abbas said, "I have not seen anything that resembles lamam better than the hadith that Abu Hurairah narrated from the Prophet." This hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari is being referred to in the commentary. It is part of the divine plan in Islam, as adultery has been apportioned by Allah to every person, so it is inevitable. Ibn Taymiyyah, a major Muslim scholar, is quoted from his Majmu' al-Fatawa: "Adultery is a major sin, but looking and touching are lamam, minor sins, which may be forgiven if one avoids major sin." In Tafsir al-Qurtubi, it explains verse 53:32 was revealed in connection to an individual called Nabhan at-Tammar, who wanted to sexually assault a woman in the back of his shop, but she refused his advances and left. Thereafter he felt guilty and told Muhammad, as he did not do intercourse, it is a minor sin. The relevant section in red is translated. In Tafsir Jalalain, it explains the verse thus: "Those who avoid grave sins and abominations, excepting lesser offences, that is, minor sins such as kiss or touch, this constitutes a discontinuous exception." In other words, the meaning is, but lesser offences are forgiven by the avoidance of grave sins. This type of behavior is confirmed by the following hadith in An-Nasai 3229, narrated Ibn Abbas: "A man came to the Messenger of Allah and said, I have a wife who is one of the most beloved of the people to me, but she does not object if anyone touches her." He, Muhammad, said, "Divorce her." He, the man, said, "I cannot do without her." He, Muhammad, said, "Then stay with her as much as you need to." This is repeated in numerous other hadiths, such as this one in Sunan Abu Dawud 2049. A man came to the Prophet and said, "My wife does not prevent the hand of a man who touches her." He, Muhammad, said, "Divorce her." He, the man, said, "I am afraid my inner self may covet her." He, Muhammad, said, "Then enjoy her." In this following hadith, Muhammad tries to touch a woman who he was not married to. Initially, he asks her to give herself as a gift to him. She refuses by saying she is of a higher status than him. When he tries to touch her, she seeks refuge from him, at which point he withdraws. A few points to consider. Firstly, it is misogynistic and presumptuous to suggest any woman should just give herself as a gift to him. She is a human being, not a commodity. Secondly, as Muhammad was not married to her, he should not have even attempted to touch her. It says in the translation, to make her tranquil. However, this is just an excuse because it had the opposite effect. It is precisely because he put his hand out that she became afraid, thinking he would molest her, at which point she said she sought refuge with Allah from him. In his commentary on Quran 33:50, the famous Quran commentator Al-Qurtubi lists 16 areas in which Muhammad was said to be allowed by Allah to act differently to the common Muslim. This shows where the Creator of the universe Allah's priorities lay. 10 of the 16 items concern Muhammad's privileges to do with women. The 10th privilege states, if he, Muhammad, looks at a woman and desires her, then it is necessary for her husband to divorce her and for Muhammad to marry her. Muhammad's own behavior and actions are alarming. If Muhammad's name was omitted and any other name was inserted into these narratives, then Muslims would say this type of behavior is appalling and will call it sexual harassment and wrong. But when Muhammad does it, Muslims make excuses for him. That in itself is a disturbing trait amongst Muslims. Therefore, they are just as complicit and guilty of his actions for justifying it, and for the actions of other Muslims who say they are just following Muhammad's behavior. This is why the faith requires apologists who are literally there to defend the faith at all costs by making every excuse and by exploiting every loophole they can find. It is not truth they seek, nor to be on the side of what is right. So in conclusion, as usual, Islamic apologetics gives itself a superficial exterior of modesty and a promoter of all things chaste and moral. However, if one looks slightly under the surface, its true horrors becomes apparent. It is not merely coincidental that the rise of sexual abuse, harassment and sexual exploitation are being perpetrated predominantly by those who identify as Muslims. Notice it is not happening amongst the Sikh, Hindu, Jew, Christian, Buddhist or even atheists to the same extent or by the same population proportion ratio percentage. Unfortunately, within Islam, when the man cannot control his desires and lusts, the blame is put on the woman. Muhammad set this precedence and called her a devil. The consequence is she is blamed if she is molested or raped. The cause of natural disasters have been laid on the charge of the woman due to her immodesty. Molestation and other deviances such as pedophilia by marrying infants and abusing them are not categorically condemned in Islam. If anything, its justification can be found from religious scriptures and from the example of their role model, Muhammad. Muhammad enticed his followers to capture blonde women, bribed men to fight wars with the promise of women, and after capturing them, to gift them to one another, to rape them even if they have husbands. He himself raped female captives. He not only had sex and fondled young girls, he encouraged it for his companions and tried to touch women who he was not married to, and asks women to be gifted to him. Even if they are another man's wife, they must divorce her if Muhammad wants her. He asked for the total subjugation of women to their husbands to the point of near worship. Marital rape laws do not exist in Islam according to major scholars due to some of his teachings. As Islam sees itself as dominant and others as inferior, it sees women as lower than men, and women who they view as immodest or not Muslim even lower and fair game if they are exploited and abused. When Muslims are shown to behave in a sexually deviant manner, it is not a deviation of the faith, as there are teachings within its sources. Its scripture shows Muhammad behaving in such a manner. To Muslims, he is the best of examples to follow. It is true there are opposing verses and traditions amongst its sources condemning such behavior, but this only highlights the contradictions within the religion. But it still stands that it cannot be said with unambiguity that the behavior of certain Muslims today contradicts the sources of Islam as shown in this video. So when it is said there is absolutely no connection between a person's religion and their actions, it is evident that this is not true. There are certain enshrined elements already part of a person's culture which is intertwined with their religion that predisposes an individual to act a certain way over another. It must be said, thankfully, the majority of those who call themselves Muslims do not behave in this manner due to their own internal moral compass, which makes them better than their prophet and their religion.